Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well after this party. I was in bed very early. So I'm very excited to have Gigi and Albert here. You already introduced them kindly. So the reason why we also wanted to have this conversation is because they're married for a long time, have 3 grown-up children, living in New York City. But at one point, they decided to look into psychedelics. But my first question would be, why is it important to you to talk about this here in front of an audience also?
Yeah. Well, I never thought I would be here talking about psychedelics or therapy-guided psychedelics for that matter. But I do believe it's important to talk about it because we can normalize it, and then so many more people around the world can benefit from it.
Thank you. And Albert, tell us a little bit about your personal background, why you eventually started to look into this thing.
Well, maybe start with, I grew up in Germany in a fairly traditional German village just outside of Nuremberg, a couple hours north of here. And when I was growing up there, born in '67, the prevailing attitude was there was not ever a mention of such a thing as a therapist. You were kind of like expected to solve your own problems. Mental health was just not a topic that anybody talked about. And so, yeah, so it was very, I think, for a lot of people our age, very traditional background.
So, but still, so you probably didn't wake up one day and said, let's do psychedelics.
No, definitely not.
What happened in the meantime?
Well, it was a journey, so to speak. I was very fortunate to spend a year in the US when I was 16. I kind of fell in love with this sense of possibility and the sense that things can change, that you can change yourself. About a decade ago or so, I realized that I had a real problem that I had not addressed. And the problem was that when I got frustrated, it would end up in anger. That rarely happened in the business context, but it happened a lot in the family context. And it was a real problem. And so I started talk therapy, and I made progress, but the progress was slow, and sometimes it was elusive. And then we read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, and I was like, that sounds really interesting. So that was kind of what really got me interested in, is there a role for psychedelics to complement therapy?
By the way, Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, if you're interested in this, it's still a very good book for beginners. I also basically started with it. But Gigi, how did you get interested in this, or how did you approach the psychedelic topic?
Yeah, so I've learned, thanks to you and others, that psychedelics really is the future of mental health. And so I wanted to invest in it, but before I invested, I figured, okay, I should really try it out. So thanks to you, arranging a trip to Amsterdam, a psychedelic journey, we got to really appreciate the power of it.
I mean, we should say in this moment that there is a whole structure now in the Netherlands where people can just make a decision and engage in these experiences. There are therapists who have let's say, a safe protocol, a safe setting. So it's no longer kind of a wild card thing to do. So because most people who would like to look into this are not necessarily psychonauts, so they have several, not yet, but it comes later. So, but they like to look into things or questions that they have. So, and you can engage already in this, structure, and it's a safe space in the meantime, I would say. So, but maybe you talk a little bit about how the journey was for you, how long and how did you feel a little bit, because that's the big question. How does it feel? How will I be a different person afterwards and stuff? So maybe you can talk about this.
Yeah, so my journey was actually, I had a few journeys. They're 5 hours, but also the longest was 9 hours. And I got a really good tip from the therapist who guided us, which was to look for the oysters and you'll find the pearls. Now, not literally the oysters, right? But you look for things that may have meaning for you, things that you may or may not have faced, and you start to engage, and then you'll find the pearls or the meaning from them. What I also find interesting was that there was music that the therapist played during the journey. And with each song or tune that played, the scenes in my mind changed. So it was a really interesting way to kind of progress the journey forward.
But you also saw certain things, like the parties, the flight of your family from Germany. Maybe you can address this a little?
Yeah, so I would say there are probably three kind of connections or aha moments that I had during my journey, or journeys. So the first happened in the 1930s in Berlin. My family had a house there, and my grandmother used to entertain folks like Einstein. I'd heard sort of these family stories, and there I was in a garden party wearing a frilly dress and a hat and engaging, and I made the connection that I, too, as you know, like to throw salons and parties, and I never really made that connection to my grandmother. The second scene, and I think it was connected, was a vision of my grandmother who was fleeing from the Nazis. She packed up her big leather suitcases, and I was in the hallway and kind of following her out, and in tow were her 4 children, including my mother. And I remember then making the connection between her, like what a powerful woman. She must have been strong to flee with the 4 kids. And then I kind of realized that my mom raised us by herself. My father passed away when I was younger, had 3 kids. And so that strong maternal line really struck a chord with me that I hadn't ever focused on. And probably the last connection I'd to talk about is the one about my father. And I'd forgotten that he had these these eyes that sparked, and they're the same eyes that my daughter actually inherited. And I hadn't made this connection before, but we founded together this community learning hub in Hudson that's called the Spark of Hudson. And I realized, gosh, I must have named this learning center after my father.
Wow, but I mean, I want to mention quickly that it's so interesting that even the flight of your grandmother, and you would think like, oh, that's like so long ago, it still has an impact on a life, like maybe almost like 100 years later.
Yeah,
and
it's never anything I really thought about. I mean, I obviously know my family history, but that it had such a deep impact on me was quite striking.
So, and along the line, we're waiting for this moment. You changed also your name. I met you as Susan Danziger, but now you're called Gigi Danziger.
Yeah.
How did this come along?
Yeah. So, well, my middle name is Virginia, so Gigi's short for Virginia. But actually, in my journey, so my Aunt Virginia, she was the one who actually sponsored the visas for my family so they could leave Berlin and come to the States. And there I was in my journey in her Park Avenue apartment, and she was on a big comfy chair, and I was on the floor. I remember looking up at her and thinking to myself, gosh, I should be called Virginia or Gigi for short. And so it didn't happen right away, but over the coming few months, I've kind of realized that Gigi is how I want to be known in my next chapter.
Which is starting now. So Albert, coming to you, and now that you live with Gigi.
I'm very excited about it.
So take us through your first trip. And we're still talking about independent trips here, like the 2 of them did independently.
So in the run-up to the trip, I had talked to the therapist who we were working with about an area of fear for me, which is kind of anxiety around aging. As you get older, parts of your body don't look the way they used to, or don't work the way they used to, and I was feeling a lot of anxiety around this process. My trip, I was literally a cat for the entire trip, starting as a little kitten, and ending up as like a grizzled old cat. When you do these trips, you have somebody in the room with you, and I remember, I will never forget this moment, but this person said, can I put my hands on your feet? This was towards the end of the trip. And I had the sensation of having these huge paws, and she was putting her hands on my paws. But the important part is I felt really comfortable as this grizzled old cat. I felt really comfortable in that body. Now, this isn't to say that like this one-time experience like got rid of all my anxiety around getting older. I think that's also, of course, tied to our anxieties around death. But there is now this moment that I can go back to. And that's very powerful. It's like to have this memory, it's very powerful to be able to go back to that.
I mean, also something that came out of your first independent trips is the idea around dancing and music, that where you always, I mean, you could talk about it, how you always come back to this other way of communication. So maybe you just could mention this, because I think it's very beautiful.
Yeah, so throughout one of my journeys, I found myself waltzing, dancing, which, by the way, I don't know how to do the waltz. But there I was waltzing through this trip, and with different partners. Sorry, sweetie. And then after this journey, I had this urge now to be dancing every day. And interestingly, I recently read an article that talked about dancing being one of the things that can help mental health the most.
Wow, okay, that's powerful. Also, because music becomes also such a powerful element in the actual trip, right?
Yeah,
then you start to remember also songs or moments. So. But now we come to the couples trip. So basically you trip independently, and at one point you look into things as a couple. And the main thing about psychedelic couples therapy is that it changes the existing structure one has of intimacy, and also not only the individual, but also the couple. So Albert, maybe you start to elaborate on this a little bit. What changed?
Yeah, so there were sort of many different insights, but two particularly kind of stand out for me. During one of the experiences, I sort of had this profound realization how, I had sort of become mired in thinking about weaknesses and things I was not happy with in terms of the relationship, in terms of Gigi, but in terms of myself, kind of this sort of like, you take all the good bits for granted. It's like you take all the strength for granted. And, you have these visions. I had this beautiful vision of us as kind of king and queen, and I was like, wow, she is such a powerful woman, and why did I not see that? How did I stop seeing that? Like, why did I focus on the little things? And so that's, again, one of those things that now I carry around with me and I can go back to in moments where I might be suddenly obsessed about something like, maybe not being as organized as I as a German would like to be. I'm like, no, that's actually really not important at all. And I think the second kind of moment that really, really stands out for me is in a different session where we were kind of together in a state of being able to talk to each other and talk about hard things in a non-defensive way. I think another really big challenge is when you get to hard topics is that when your partner wants to say something, you already know that you're actually doing it wrong. And then you become really defensive because you just don't want to be like, yeah, actually, that was a mistake. And so you start dig in instead. And conversely, when you try to give feedback, sometimes you have so much pent-up, frustration that instead of giving gentle feedback, it just comes rushing out. And so we were in this state where we were able to talk about difficult things in a very loving and connected way. And that's, again, something that, we're not going to get right every time, but it's a thing to hang on to and go back to.
Queen Gigi, anything to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, when you started talking about us as sort of, king and queen, it was, and being that unit, that powerful unit together, I mean, it was such a moving moment for me and so impactful. The fact that we are together and that we deal with the issues as they come up, we tackle them, and and then coming back to the moment of connection, even, they say for better, for worse, in those worst times, right? Is so critical for us, I think, just knowing that we have that connection. And I do have to say that during the trip, I felt this. And let me preface it by saying that I am not a sappy person. But during the trip, I felt this profound love for Albert here that was really striking and one that I carry to this day.
Applause. So, but of course, everybody's asking themselves secretly, is this about emotional intimacy or physical intimacy?
It's definitely both, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, short break.
I think that we're definitely, we've rediscovered one another. And I have to say, I think we've saved ourselves a really expensive divorce.
Or two.
Or two.
Or three.
We're probably on our, fourth or fifth marriage by this point.
Or you would be married like 5 times again, like this.
Yeah.
Every time a new wedding or something. So, but Albert, you were mentioning these. Maybe you can elaborate on a little bit on this. That
Yeah, I mean, I
two
think
words.
one of the things is, there's this concept of NRE, right? New relationship energy. It's like when you fall in love with somebody and you have this extraordinary sensation of how wonderful the other person is, and of you're so connected, and the sex is great, and then you have children and a career and build businesses and setbacks and floods in the basement and all the things that are life together, and so it's very hard to hang on to this, and so. The way we now think of this a little bit is DRE, sort of durable relationship energy. But it does require investment, it does require renewal. And that's, I think, what this combination of therapy and psychedelics is a kind of a renewal, a profound renewal of the individual and of the relationship.
And how do you make this, Gigi, how do you make this durable?
Yeah, so probably every few months, every 3 months or so, I'd say, we go on another journey together. And I feel like I get new Alberts every time. And with the new Gigi, I would say that our marriage keeps getting better and better.
So you're basically married to new two people.
Yeah.
Actually, to versions of ourselves, evolving versions of ourselves.
Okay. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for your openness and willingness to bring this into the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.